we are prone and our tendency is to already love ourselves with all our strength, with all our heart, with all our soul.
Mm.
Whether that's a healthy sort of way or a prideful, selfish kind of way, we all like
To have empathy, to have grace for yourself, to understand yourself, to love yourself, and to say like,
I shouldn't have the mindset that this is mine. Like
right.
I've worked hard for this.
Right.
Like if God says go and give it away, then
Yep.
like do I trust that he has something better
Mhm.
instead of just, being sad and mopey about it and like
hello, welcome back to the New Life Young Adults podcast. We are here for another week in our series, You Were Made for This, Loving the Lord, Others, and Yourself. In this podcast, we are all about committing to adding authenticity, community, and value to your life. We hope that you felt it through this series and this topic that we think is really important, really central to what it means to be a disciple, loving the Lord, others, and yourself. And we're here for part 3, our last part in the series. Today we're talking about loving yourself. Before we get to that, I just want to remind everyone. We were looking at some stats, some data. We realized about 78% of you who watch and listen are not subscribed, which means you're missing out on some of this stuff. Like we want to have an ongoing relationship with you, and so we would just encourage you to subscribe so you can continue to get notifications about the episodes we release and some of the ideas that we've had going forward. So please subscribe so you can hear more topics like this, and so that we can hear from you. Please comment as well. Like we read those comments and want to interact.
Want to engage.
Now, this series, we've been basing this conversation on Mark 12:30-31, which says this: love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this. He's talking about what is the greatest commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. Jesus is saying this is how do you fulfill the law? How do you see yourself right with God and right with others? It's by faith, you receive God's love for you, for yourself, and then you pour that back to him and pour that out to others. And possibly the most difficult one for some people is having some of that love for yourself as well. So today we're talking about what does it look like to love yourself? Why should we do it? And how do we do it in a healthy way? Now I'm here with Lauren and Abel.
Hello.
What do you guys think? What comes to your mind when you hear the idea of loving yourself and self-love?
I mean, I think of just like the cringy self-motivation stuff, it's out there sometimes. Like that's the first thing that comes to my head is like, love yourself, like put yourself first. You do you, boo.
Yeah.
And it's like a lot of that stuff has been not helpful.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing, honestly, that's the first thing that comes to my mind when I hear of self-love.
Treat yourself.
I'd have to agree.
Treat yourself.
Yeah, all those like mantras or one-time phrases, but they kind of catch.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
And everyone's just like, yeah, you do you.
Yeah, you
and
do
you're
you.
like, actually, it's not really good for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think sometimes selfishness too, just like being super self-focused and like internal about life is kind of what I think of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say the same for me. Whenever someone talks about self-love, loving yourself, I always kind of am like, ooh, like,
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, have a self-care day.
Yeah, but I wonder if, I think there's two aspects to our reaction in that way. I think in one sense, it's probably really good because there's a lot of selfishness. There's a lot of toxicity that comes into that. I've seen people like completely push people away and treat others poorly in the name of self-love. So I think that's a valid reaction from us. At the same time, I've noticed in myself that reaction comes from an unhealthy place in myself where I'm thinking, where I am not maybe taking care of myself well or loving myself well. And so I react like, oh, like I'm supposed to be on the grind. I'm supposed to like constantly be at work and productive and doing all these things. Like that's the ideal, right? And I have a hard time giving myself space to love myself, or not even that only, but also like I carry shame. I'm really hard on myself sometimes, and I have a hard time forgiving myself. And so it feels selfish to let go of some of those things, and to embrace self-love. So I think there's like an interesting kind of tension there. Yeah, tension's a great word. An interesting tension between how can self-love be selfish, and how can self-love be like the least selfish thing you can do? Does that make sense?
Yeah. You know what's interesting? I was reading the verses is, okay, Jesus is telling people who are listening, right? Love the Lord your God with, so he mentions a couple of things, right? With all your heart, with all your mind, and with all your strength. Why doesn't he say that about ourselves? Why doesn't he also say love your neighbor as yourself with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength? I think it's because we already know how to do that. We are prone, and our tendency is to already love ourselves with all our strength, with all our heart, with all our soul. Whether that's a healthy sort of way or a prideful, selfish kind of way, we all like our bent is to do that. And maybe that's not true for everybody, right? Like, I think there's a lot of times that maybe we can struggle with, self-hate and insecurities, and we don't feel like, but I think for the most part, or not for the most part, I think there are a lot of us that already love ourselves with all those qualities, with all our strength, with all our heart, because of in one way, because of sin, right? Sin has made we make us the center of our lives instead of making God the center of our lives. And so we naturally just love ourselves with all our heart, strength, and soul. And so I think it's just interesting that Jesus, like, he's like, I don't need to tell them that because they're already going to do that. But he then takes it and says, okay, as you love yourself, love your neighbor. And so then the question then becomes like, how do we love ourselves well? How do we love ourselves in the way that isn't selfish, is in a way that honors God, and is a way that pours out back to our neighbor and to God himself? But I thought it was just interesting as I was reading, I'm like, wait, he didn't say that. He only said that for God. He didn't say that for ourselves. And it's probably because we already do that for ourselves.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. I also just want to acknowledge, because going back to the verse made me think, like, some people are maybe even questioning what are you talking about? Love yourself.
Yeah.
I feel like it's often missed in this verse, because we usually think, oh, love God, love others. But just to point out to people so that you're on the same track as we are, this is where we're getting this from. It says, love your neighbor as yourself. Like Abel was saying, like, the love that you have for your neighbor is meant it's equal to the love that you have for yourself.
Right.
And so it's like, so that means there is space for you to love yourself. But like, I like what you say, Abel. Like, we are naturally selfish. Naturally
and Jesus knows that.
Naturally concerned for our well-being, what we like to do, our comfort, our pleasure, our survival. And
so he's saying, take that and then apply that to other people, and love them in the same way, that with the intensity that you love yourself.
Yeah.
Take that intensity and that focus and that drive, and now just shift it over to other people, which is easier said than done, obviously.
For sure.
But it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what the last two episodes were about. I'm tempted to go in that route, but I know last week last episode was the conversation on loving others. So, because I think even in this conversation, we might be tempted to like talk about love for others, because it's uncomfortable to talk about love for ourselves in a positive way. I think it's really easy to talk about it in a negative way, but it's hard to discern what's the healthy way. But I mean, maybe before we get to the positive, what do you think are some of the things that kind of get in the way of us loving ourselves, or cause it to be like an unhealthy version? I think, Abel, you kind of already were addressing a little bit about that. We're naturally selfish, which kind of pushes others out. But is there anything else you can think of, like unhealthy ways, things that cause it to be unhealthy or keep us from doing it in the first place?
Lauren?
I'm still like a few steps behind. I was thinking of like a visual to what you were saying about sometimes it's harder to love ourselves and easier to love others, but it's important for us to love ourselves in order to love others. And I love plants, and I don't know if I've shared this before, but all of like my thought process is like, if you don't water the plant, and if the plant's roots don't soak up the water and then release the rest through like the bottom holes in the pot, then the water just kind of sits in the pot and rots the roots, right? And so I think it's the same way. Like, I think people are like plants. Like, we can receive love from the Lord. We soak up the nutrients that we need, but then we can release the rest to those around us so that we ourselves don't just like selfishly get sick on, I don't know, like all the love that we're receiving, like we need to be
The
pouring out.
self-contained,
Yeah,
yeah.
like you receive from the Lord, but then you pour out the abundance that he gave you.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like how yeah, one day I was like watering my plants and I just felt like God brought that to mind. And that really helped me understand it's important to first receive from the Lord, take the nutrients, like you need to be loved by God first, but then also don't hold on to it and just hoard it all, like release love and give freely to those around you, knowing that God will always give in abundance to you. So that's what I was kind of thinking.
I really like that analogy.
awesome.
Never heard it before.
Yep.
It's kind of like the popular version I've heard is like, you can't pour out of an empty cup.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So if you yourself are empty, then you can't expect to pour out love, care, concern,
Yeah.
whatever for others or energy towards your job, like whatever it may be. If you're empty, you just can't do that. But I love that plant image. That's really good.
Yeah.
The empty cup one is like, wait, I just got it. Like, why am I emptying it? You know, like, I don't really like that analogy.
I love that.
True.
And yeah, to touch on your question, Zach, what are some like unhealthy ways of, I think some of the ones that I mentioned before, like the insecurities, just being selfish. Oh man, there are so many others that like, there are just so many selfish ways of loving yourself, ways that are unhealthy of doing that. I've been learning a lot recently about narcissism.
Oh,
And just like
based on our conversation last week.
yeah, when I like get fixated on something, I just like want to like, I just deep dive into something.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like a new topic or something new. I just deep dive into it. And so I've just been learning all these different things about narcissism, and there's so much to it. But that is for sure not just an unhealthy, but that's like a personality disorder, right? Like
right.
where it's like,
Yeah, it's like a clinical, like,
clinically diagnosed disorder. But it's interesting to like even, some of the things that narcissistic people think through how they see the world. It's very much like I'm at the center of it, and everyone around me, I can move people like pawns to get what I want, right? And that's like the extreme end of the spectrum, right? Narcissism. But I think, if we're honest with ourselves, there are a lot of times that we can be selfish in life, and we can tend to put ourselves first over others, or maybe we tend to love ourselves in ways that are unhealthy.
Yeah. I think I will just be really honest. I was so selfish growing up. I remember I saved up all my pennies. This is embarrassing. I saved up all my pennies and I went to the Dollar Tree and I bought gum. And I was so excited that I was able to like buy something on my own. Like
What
mom
kind-
and dad
What
didn't
kind
give
of
me
gum?
one.
Was it like the
It was
roll
like the
Hubba
green.
Bubba?
No, it was like the sticks of like green spearmint.
Okay.
I don't know why I was so excited for
Yeah,
that.
nice and minty.
But this day I had
Nice
enough
and
money to buy like the pack that comes
Yeah.
with like multiple of them.
Mhm.
I was like, I'm gonna have gum for like 3 years. Like
I'm stacked.
in my like 5-year-old brain. And I got in the car and our homeschool family that we were homeschooling with was leaving. And so one of the girls that was my age said, "Oh, Lauren, can I have some gum?" And I said, "No."
Yeah.
And I got in the van and I was like, I'm not giving my gum away.
Yeah.
Power
Mom
move.
opens the door. She's like, "Lauren, you're gonna give gum to your friend because you're just being so selfish." And I remember thinking like, this is my gum. I worked hard for this. Like,
Yeah.
why would I go and give it to my friend who, I love, but I'm not gonna give my gum to my friend.
Yeah.
And I remember like that's just like a small picture, I think, of how selfish. Like I just have realized in the past 10 years that I am one of the most selfish human beings. But I think that came from a mindset of like scarcity or like I have to hold on to it or I'm never going to get it back.
Mhm.
And so it's hard. It was hard for me like 10 years ago when after high school and stuff and going into missions, it was hard for me to just give freely, like anything that could be like food or snacks or my devices and whatever, like even just loving someone, I held on so tightly because I thought I'm never going to get this back and I don't want to give it up.
Yeah.
And so I think like a lot of thinking about loving yourself, sometimes selfishness can be like based on a mindset that you have, and that could be the way that you were raised, or if you're raised with siblings and everyone reaches for food around the table, suddenly you're like the one without the crumbs, the crumbs left. You're like, you just learn how to be like holding tightly to things. And so, I don't know if that's making sense, but
Mhm.
the mindset kind of feeds into selfishness, which is where I think loving yourself can get really skewed because you have this mindset of just like, this is mine. I don't want to lose it. I'm holding tight to it. And I'm scared of what would happen if I don't have it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So really like self-love, I think kind of what we're saying is like self-love, maybe love isn't the right word. I'm kind of uncomfortable using the word love for what we're talking about.
Mhm.
Maybe it's like what we often refer to as self-love is more like self-indulgence
Yeah.
and self-exaltation and the worship of self to the exclusion of others or whatever. Because love like seeks the life and flourishing of the thing it loves, right?
Mhm.
So if you love someone, you're going to seek their good, their flourishing, their life, their joy, even if it causes if it requires sacrifice on your part. With what we're saying is like the selfishness, this like self-indulgence actually does not lead to your own flourishing. It actually leads to an unhealthiness and a even toxicity at times in yourself that hurts yourself in the long run. Even though it feels like you're feeding yourself, you're actually hurting yourself and the people around you in the long run. And so I would even say like what we normally think of as self-love is not even self-love. It's something else. It's putting yourself, like selfishness puts yourself above others. Love puts I'm maybe in love. I don't know. It's just a thought. I don't know if I'd want to write this in a book and be quoted, but like, I wonder if in love, there's just no ranking. There's no ranking system. In selfishness, you're putting yourself above others. And when you love others, it's not like you're putting them above yourself as if they like are a better, their existence is worth more than your existence, right? It's like you're just pouring into their flourishing and their life, and you're willing to give up of yourself for that, And so maybe it's like we just need to get rid of the ranking system and be like, oh, I've been treated poorly, and I need to, make sure I'm treating myself in this way to make up for that. Anyways, that was a little bit jumbled, but maybe let's talk about.
Can I add something real quick?
Yeah.
So something that as you were talking, I was thinking of when you said, I don't like kind of like using the word self-love. I was wondering if loving yourself comes from a self-awareness. And here's what I mean by that. When you become self-aware of where you're of what you're lacking, then you can then know how to meet your own needs. So for example, I'm self-aware that I am exhausted right now. That I've worked 5 days straight and I haven't given myself a break yet. I need a day of rest. And so to love yourself is to be first self-aware enough to know what you are lacking, right?
Yeah.
I whether it's getting to the word, journaling, praying, doing things that recuperate yourself. You have to know that. For me, I think a healthy form of self-love then comes first with having a self-awareness of one's needs and what you are needing in that moment, whether it's rest, food, time with family, time with friends, watch a movie. What do you need in this moment that is going to that you are aware of that then will then fill you up, so then you can go and love others and love God and whatnot.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
I love that point. Let's keep on talking in this kind of area. Like, what does it look like then to love ourselves well and in a healthy way, without falling into that like selfishness that we have been talking about and that self-indulgence? Because I think that's great. And I was just thinking, even Lauren, while you were talking about your gum thing.
Why is it always like Tic Tacs or gum? Like, what?
You tell us.
Oh my
gosh.
gosh.
That's for you to tell us.
It's like, who was I as a child? Dear God. Okay, anyway, moving on.
But I think a self-awareness helps us to understand because I think self-love could look different for different people.
Yeah.
So for example, like if someone is constantly giving, constantly giving, and just like they're very
Giving
generous and they're
fatigue.
just giving fatigue, like they're just like
Yeah.
they give so much that they don't know how to receive.
Yeah.
In that case, maybe self-love would mean buying a pack of gum that's just for them. I'm reminded like when we were little, I have a big family. When we get snacks, they go pretty quickly. I was one of those people who was like, oh, all the food's gone. I need to make sure I get some for myself, which interestingly enough, I've seen ramifications for that in my present behavior as well. We could get into that another time. But when we go to the grocery store, maybe your parents would do this too, I don't know. But my parents would get certain snacks, and instead of putting them in like the kitchen cupboard, they would keep them in their bedroom because they were like, these are our snacks. These are for us.
Oh, dang.
Like,
Oh my gosh.
the kids are not going to touch these things.
I respect that.
And I was like, what? That's not fair. Like, they get the nice snacks, they get all this stuff. But like, at the same time, it's like, okay, you do provide for us.
Yeah.
You do like buy the groceries. I just
Yeah.
run around eating everything.
Right. Yeah.
Like that, maybe that was an example of self-love. I mean, it's not necessarily a black and white example, right?
Yeah.
But like, I just reminded of that. Like maybe for someone who gives constantly, their form of self-love is to allow themselves to like just get something for themselves
Yeah.
and to not indulge in it,
Right.
Yeah.
but to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And not to like keep it from someone who's in need,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe to say like have boundaries. Maybe boundaries is we always come back to boundaries in these conversations, I feel like.
Yeah. So it sounds like,
Mm.
yeah, I agree. I don't think there's anything wrong with being, I just say this, but there's nuance to it with being selfish. Like if you worked hard for something and you have let's say I'm thinking of like, I don't know, a pair of shoes or something. And like you want a pair of shoes or you're into fashion, you want some like, and you're paying your bills, you're giving, your finances are in order and you want to, buy something nice. Like there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's totally okay. You're not doing anything wrong. And I don't know if selfish is the right word, but it's kind of like, you're buying something that you enjoy and that you want. And I think that's a good thing. I think when it becomes an indulgence or you're sacrificing other things, right? You're not paying your bills. You're not putting money into your savings. You're not giving. You're not doing, your responsibilities. Then that becomes like you are now not loving yourself because you're not taking care of what you need to take care of first. And instead you're going straight to your desires and taking care of your desires. And so I think there's like, even in that, there's self-awareness, there's boundaries that need to be put into place
Yeah.
to love yourself in a healthy way.
Yeah. And maybe the line between selfishness and not in that scenario is like holding it open-handed. I've worked hard. I give a lot. I'm a generous person. I'm going to go buy these nice Air Jordans, but I'm going to hold it open and say it like if for whatever reason God's like, oh, like, you know what? So-and-so needs a new pair of shoes and give them your new pair of shoes that you've had for a week that you love.
Yeah.
Like if I'm holding it like this, then it's like, okay, you know what? God, maybe you have better shoes for me or you've provided for me to have this nice thing and now I want to bless someone else. And I've learned that like if you hold things open-handed, and I'm still learning this, like right now I'm like saving for a car and I'm just like my little 2004 car, I'm so thankful, but I'm also holding the idea of a new car like this because in the end, I shouldn't have the mindset that this is mine. Like I've worked hard for this. Like if God says go and give it away, then like, do I trust that he has something better instead of just, being sad and mopey about it? And like, I don't know. I've been in both of those scenarios where I have like held things so tightly and I'm like being selfish and saying it's loving myself. But in reality, it's like, I wouldn't treat anyone else like this. I wouldn't be this kind of mean, selfish person to like my neighbor. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It just, I think it goes back to mindset. I can't stop kind of going back to like your mindset matters and how you perceive and see things.
Totally.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I'm thinking like sometimes the best way to love yourself. I love that the verse Mark 12:30-31. I love that, like, I mean, Jesus starts with loving God, right? Um, love the Lord your God with everything that you are. And that's a hard thing to do in and of itself. And then you introduce like human beings who are fallen. Like it's hard to love a perfect God
Mm.
with all that we are.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're told to love imperfect human beings that hurt us and who annoy us and frustrate us
Mm-hmm.
and who we don't like.
Mhm.
And we have to love them.
Mm-hmm.
And then they mention ourselves. With ourselves, sometimes there's like, we don't like them.
Mhm.
We don't like ourselves. We don't like who we are or what we've done and all these things. We have a lot of shame and that kind of stuff. So really, this is extremely challenging, but lying behind this whole like call to love is the assumption that you have received the love of God for yourself. And, you know, I think it's First John talks about, you know, we love because he first loved us. Like the love that we have for God, the love that we have for others, the love that we have for ourselves is rooted in an overflow of God's love for ourselves. That going back to that plant analogy that you used, Lauren, earlier. And so, and even like, so I think where I fail to love myself is I fail to receive God's love for myself and to like agree with him that I am lovable. And that like keeps me from loving myself. And so I think for some of us who maybe we've been like really trained, when we hear self-love, we think, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. You need to like be for others because that's what God is for. God is for others constantly. I think sometimes the best way to love yourself is to receive love. It's to let yourself receive love. Like we don't allow ourselves to receive love. We don't allow ourselves to like to be forgiven and let off the hook. We don't allow ourselves. Here's one that I struggled with as someone who grew up in a family that struggled financially. Sometimes it's letting others bless you and serve you financially and with gifts, or like to do things that like make you feel like you're weak because you have to say, I need help. Or yes, I would like a ride to this place. Or yes, I don't have enough money. Would you please pay for me? You know, that's hard. That's hard to do. And so, but that's an act of love for yourself because it's allowing yourself to ask for help. It's allowing yourself to be weak. It's allowing yourself to receive love from other people. And yeah, so I'm just thinking about that it's the overflow. Like God loves us and we decide whether or not we agree that we're lovable. And then that affects our actions. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, as you were talking, like God, because you had said that God is we see God in this picture, this lens of like he gave his son, right, for us, which is true. You know, he gave Jesus for us. He gives so much. He gives his love to us, provides for us, gives. But then we also forget that like God for eternity existed just by himself, like within himself. And he was perfectly content and perfectly happy, right? And then decided to then create humanity and allow us into that, right? But he wasn't doing that because he needed our love. He was doing that, you know, so that we got to experience, so his creation got to experience what that love was like. But I'm like, if God can be content, like what does it look like for self-love to be content with oneself, right? To be okay with oneself, to be like, I'm enjoying time with myself right now. Like I'm good, you know? And when I think of the times that I experience self-love, I think of rest, being self-aware, but also being content with myself, and being okay with where I'm at. Like I don't need to do the next thing. I don't need to read the next growth book, the next leadership book. I don't need to listen to the next podcast. I can just be content right now and love myself right where I'm at right now by, like Zach was saying, accepting that like right now there is nothing that I can do that can make God love me more, and there's nothing that I can do that can make God love me less. In Jesus, my faith in Christ has made me just loved because of what because of who I am in Christ, because I'm made in the image of God. There's nothing I can do that can make me love him more. So let me enjoy being content right where I'm at, right here, right now.
Yeah.
Let me not look to the next thing that I could do to make myself feel better. Let me just be present.
Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me of something I've been talking about with my counselor. I've been going to counseling the last 2 months. It's been great. Highly recommend it. The youth pastor goes to counseling? What? Yeah, God gave us wise people to help us through our struggles and to process through things.
Yeah,
You
go
should
too.
do it.
It's amazing.
I love those, those memes that are like, men will do anything
Except go to
therapy.
Yeah.
It's like, I love those memes. They're
Yeah.
pretty funny. We avoid it at all costs. We avoid self-love.
Yeah.
Part of me taking care of myself and loving others was going to therapy.
Yeah.
It's been nice. But one thing we've been working on is my counselor was like, Zach, I don't think you have empathy for yourself. And he's talking about like, Zach, you're really like disciplined, which I was like, I laughed at him. I was like, I think like, you think I'm a disciplined person, which just betrayed to him. Cause I was telling him like about myself and he was like, wow, you're a highly disciplined person. Like you're really intentional. Like you're constantly like trying to be productive and working towards your goals and dreams. And I laughed and I was like, I feel like I'm lazy and I'm constantly falling behind and failing, which itself was a sign that what he was saying was true. I am not happy with myself. I am not allowing myself, I'm not celebrating the growth I have. I'm not satisfied with who I am or content.
Right.
And so we've been talking about having empathy and for those moments when I maybe fail, for those moments when I do something, I was like, man, I hate that I just did that again. We've just been talking about what does it look like to have empathy, to have grace for yourself, to understand yourself, to love yourself, and to say like, man, you failed again. You gave into that, or you snapped, or you did this. Like, what brought you to a place of making those decisions? Maybe it's because you have so much pressure on yourself in every area of life that you just need to find a place where you don't feel that pressure. And so you're letting it out. You're like releasing it by snapping. You're releasing it by like eating this, like indulging in this food or indulging in this or that activity. And maybe you should identify that you are too hard on yourself. And that like you need to understand that like goes back to that self-awareness. You need to understand where you're at, all the pressures you're feeling, the ways that you're hurting, and that then you're trying to cope with that, to understand that and say like, oh, I had a really long day, like an extremely long, emotionally draining day. And now I'm tempted to have these easy releases in all these different ways. You can identify those things and then choose to say, okay, Zach, like you should have empathy for yourself. You did have a hard day, but now what's a way that you actually want to handle that? And to not go to these like usually sinful things or self-indulging things, and instead self-loving, self-caring things, which for me, maybe we can get to that in a minute. But the idea of self-empathy has really changed the way like I've changed my relationship to myself. And it's been really helpful for me to process through even getting to the place where I'm allowing myself to love myself. But I love that idea you said, Abel, of like being content with who you are and like maybe liking yourself. Like are there things about yourself that you like? Maybe it would be good for like everyone listening to take time and think about that. What is it
things that I like
about yourself that you like?
That's cool.
Don't get too cocky.
Yeah. There's a line.
There's definitely a line. And we've been trying to balance that tension this whole time.
Yeah.
Of loving yourself without going too far, without being selfish.
Yeah, I think if you can be content with yourself. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, you're good. You're good.
If you can be content with yourself, you can be content with others. If you can meet yourself where you're at, you can meet others where they're at. I think sometimes I've talked to people that they put such a high expectation on themselves to be a certain way that when they fail it hurts, and it's demoralizing. But then when other people don't meet that standard as well, it hurts. And so like if you can't meet yourself where you're at, don't expect to meet people where they're at. Yeah. And part of loving yourself is being content, but it's also like just meeting yourself where you're at. Like right now I'm here mentally, emotionally. Now what? How do I then meet that need or meet that where I'm at, right? This person, this is where they're at right now. How do the loving thing to do is meet them where they're at. Sometimes we think a loving thing to do is just slap them with Bible verses. Maybe that's not the most loving thing to do at that moment, you know? Maybe it's just coming alongside them and being present with them. Maybe it's for yourself, coming alongside yourself and being present with yourself. Being present and just allowing, expressing your hurts and your pains to God, and then sitting with them, right? And wrestling with them instead of just beating yourself up.
Yeah.
I mean, something I was thinking about based on what you said of learning to have empathy for yourself. I was just thinking, like, if you or if anyone like sees those areas in themselves and then like treats themselves, like you give yourself empathy for those moments, like you now freely can give empathy to other people. Not that you can't, if you don't show that to yourself, it's not like you can't show that to other people,
Right.
but your likelihood and your effectiveness and
Yeah.
your
Ness.
yeah.
Yeah.
Genuinity? Was that a word?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. I
Genuineness?
tried to invent a new word. It didn't work.
Genuine?
Genuineness in that, I think, is more effective if you yourself first show yourself that empathy, then you can like so freely give that to other people.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same.
Yes.
Like if we show ourselves or we treat ourselves a certain way, then it's more likely and more effective when we show that to other people. I think that's, like I tend to be like more harsh on myself. Like, Lauren, you messed up. You shouldn't have said that. Why'd you do that? Like just kind of talking to myself, maybe not in the best way.
Beating yourself up?
Yeah. Just being really harsh and kind of like, girl, what are you doing? You know? And I tend to then be like that with people when I get frustrated. And something I'm learning now is I maybe should treat myself with a little bit more kindness. Doesn't mean that you can't be firm sometimes and be like, okay, that was too far. Like, let's be honest with ourselves, Not that I have conversations like that.
Yeah, I think we all do.
Yeah, we all talk to ourselves.
For sure. The inner critic.
But like be honest with yourself first, and then you're able to treat other people in the same way. So I think it's really hard and it's really humbling and it takes a lot of work. But when you do, it's just like you love people and you feel full, not empty. You give to people and you love them, you listen, you ask questions, and all of a sudden you're like, I actually feel good. Like I feel better now that I've just given freely because one, I've received and I treat myself this way. So why wouldn't I treat someone else this way? Is kind of what I was thinking down that vein of what you shared, Zach.
Yeah, that's good. This conversation reminds me of a, I'll paraphrase, but like a quote from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who wrote a book called Life Together, which I highly recommend. It's a really great book. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a pastor during Nazi Germany, and he was one who resisted Germany. And he had this like community of believers that he was trying to like preserve and say like, how do we live life together as believers? And one of the things he says is, beware the person who cannot be in community. So they isolate themselves and they like kind of, they do their own thing. And I think that feeds into like the self-indulgence we talked about. Like, I don't need anybody else. I'm good on my own. And then you kind of feed into yourself. What that does is that doesn't allow you to be loved by others or to help others, like to be in community. But then he also says after that, he says, beware the person who cannot be alone. Because what happens if you're not alone is you will begin to use the community as an escape from yourself.
Yeah.
And
So true.
because when you're alone,
You're with your thoughts.
and you're not playing your music and you're not listening to the podcasts
Yep.
and you're not watching movies and you don't have Netflix on in the background, you're alone with your thoughts. And that's where the scary stuff happens. And that's where you have to think about the conversation you had yesterday with your friend where you said something you shouldn't have. That's where you have to think about your desires that you have that are leading you towards these areas. That's when you have to think about the ways that you've been hurt. And we want to run from those things. We want to escape those things. And so what happens if we cannot be alone, if we cannot find ways to care for ourselves, to find healing for ourselves, to be with God and invite him into those things, and to realize that when we are alone, we are not by ourselves, when we don't do those things, we turn to our community to escape. And then those people in our community become less than people to us. They become tools to fix the problems that we're running from, which don't end up fixing the problems.
Right.
And it just makes us ready to explode. It causes us to misuse and abuse other people, even subtly, ways we don't realize. And that all comes from our failure to love ourselves. So just thinking about that, maybe we should start to head towards a close with I think we should talk about two things. Maybe just briefly, what are ways that you love yourself? What are ways that our listeners can love themselves? Kind of practical things. And then how does that feed into, how does that relate to loving others?
Yeah. I think for me, it starts with just having the self-awareness. Like, you got to be self-aware of what you're lacking. And sometimes I can find myself pushing and like, oh man, it's been 2 weeks since I've had really like just a Saturday to just chill out and to do nothing. And so I being self-aware enough. And then for me, self-love also looks like creating margin in my schedule, like creating time throughout the week and on the weekends where I'm doing things that are filling me up. I'm spending time with my friends, spending time with my girlfriend, with her family. I'm doing things at sports, outside, nature, activities, just not thinking about the things that are taking out from me, but doing things and thinking about things, spending time with God and doing the stuff that fills me up. So margin and self-awareness, but then just creating that margin in schedules to be able to have those times and those spaces of being able to sit with your thoughts and engage in things that fill you up.
Yeah. I'd say two things would probably be like quiet the noise is the phrase that kind of comes to mind, of like turn down the music, turn off the TV, turn off everything that's distracting, turn off your phone, and just sit down and like be with yourself. Like, the world will go on, but you just sit down, be quiet with yourself, and just like become like self-aware. Like, how am I doing?
Yeah.
How do I feel? And then the second thing would be honest with yourself. I think I did that a couple times in the past few years, and I realized how not good I was doing and how I just was so depleted from giving out that I didn't want to be honest with myself, like, oh, I'm actually in a really unhealthy place right now. And mentally and physically seeing the repercussions of my choices to not like stop and love myself and do those times where you create margin and spend time with people who refill you, and it's just life-giving. Like, I wasn't doing that or making time for that. So the other thing I think I'm realizing a lot now and seeing the fruit of it is prayer and studying God's word. Like, as much as I am able to try and do that as often as I can, at least once a day. And that just does wonders. Like, there's really no explanation or no like, other than like you're communing with God, you're talking with him, and you're learning about him, and you're allowing space for him to fill you. And in this day and age, I think it's really hard to create space to do that. So just turn down the noise and turn up the volume of like the Holy Spirit and his voice and what his word is saying. And I feel like that will do wonders, along with creating margin, spending time with people that you love that refill you. Be good.
Yeah. Margin is such a big thing. I've had endless conversations with people our age who are just like, I am tired. I'm burnt out. I need margin. It's affecting my health, like in all these different ways. And I feel it too. And I think it's one of the problems that our generation has. And so creating margin definitely is high up on the list. Quiet the noise. I love it. I've been like trying to drive more. Like, usually I think about like, oh, how can I make the most of my time? So I listen to podcasts while I drive, or while I work out, or while I walk, while I shower. And I've just tried to do that less. Be like, you know what, this drive, I'm just gonna be silent. This shower, I'm just gonna play no music or no podcasts. And you know what? Showers are the best places to think.
Yes.
It's actually like scientifically, like it creates a what's it called? It's like a sensory deprivation kind of experience where the sound of the water, the feel of the warmth, the steam, like You're in an isolated place. You're not distracted by all this stuff.
No one's gonna interrupt you.
That's like actually
Yeah.
one of the most perfect environments you can be in to think creatively, to
Yes.
think
It's so
clearly.
true.
Like
Mm.
if I'm ever stuck like writing a message or in a project or
Let's go take a
something,
shower.
I'm like, let me take a shower real quick, let my mind process it. So like, yeah, just cut out some of the noise. It's taking up space. And one thing I would also recommend is just like try to like do your best to, when you're doing these things, when you're in these times of margin, when you are with friends or watching a movie or reading a book or like cooking, like whatever it is for you, completely shut out the thoughts of the deadlines that are approaching and the projects you need to do. And for me, it's like, Zach, you could be doing so much else with your time.
Yeah.
And realize that taking care of yourself, filling yourself up, delighting in the things God has given you is worth the time in itself.
Mhm.
It itself is something you should be doing and is worth the time. And so I have to fight like, Zach, forget about that. It'll happen when it happens. And then the last thing I'll say is like, do you realize when you are self-indulging and then push yourself? Like sometimes I am lazy.
Yeah.
And it's not, and maybe we should talk sometime about the difference between rest and laziness.
Mhm.
But I'm lazy, which means I'm not being purposeful with my time, where I'm like my downtime. And I need to push myself and say like, Zach, you need to exercise. Zach, you need to go cook a meal. Zach, you need to read. Like you need to do this stuff. And so in that sense, I'm like self-indulging, and I need to push myself to be like, no, Zach, actually to love yourself, you actually need to be doing something right now. So, yeah. And you know what, with the community thing, I think we've talked about that throughout. So
Yeah.
I think we're ready to end this conversation. I actually think we could continue it like most of our conversations.
Yeah, for sure.
But I learned a lot through this.
Yeah.
Even this conversation today, like,
Yeah.
some of the things you guys mentioned were really helpful for me to hear.
Yeah.
Totally.
Well, that wraps up our 3-part series. We do believe that you were made for this, loving the Lord, especially loving others and loving yourself. Obviously, you could go way deeper in all 3 of these topics, but we'd love to hear your feedback. Please drop comments, subscribe. You can also Instagram message us with ideas for other podcast episodes that you would like to hear. But we want to interact. We want to hear your feedback, and we really appreciate those who do subscribe and follow our channel. We appreciate the support and all the people that even come up to us in person and say, hey, I've seen you on this podcast. But yeah, we'd love to hear from you, and we hope that this brought value to you and helps build your community. So until next time, have a great day.
Peace.
Bye-bye.